Our particular one here on the island goes back 130 years, back in the 1800s. And it's been continuous every year, no matter what came. At one time, we had a severe fire that burned all of our church property to the ground. What had been put there by our forefathers. The tabernacle that we have now was rebuilt after the fire. That is the second one, but on the same site. And this one was a little larger than the one that was burnt. That was one of the first building that our forefathers seen fit to rebuild after we had the Great Fire. The fire was in 35. And they were going along, and it was no crabs at all. And they were almost literally about to starve here on the island. And one of the guys in the store, his name was Willis Evans, said, "Boys, we've got to get together. We got to start building this church property back. If we don't, we're all going to starve." So right then and there, they took up a collection, got enough money to buy the materials. The same guy, Willis Evans, had a big oyster buy boat at that time. And they went up to Salisbury, up the Wicomico River, and got the materials and started the tabernacle. And the next year they had it going. The reason it's so important to us, it's been one of the focal points of our community for all of these years. That would be the time that people that had moved away and hadn't seen their family or friends in a long time would always come back home for camp meeting. Boys, it was in the services of our country. They would always aim to have their leave arranged that they would be taking their 30-day leave at camp meeting time. That always had that importance in our community. Now, if you go back to when our forefathers started this, you got to remember this community weren't like it is now. It was people all over. They populated these different places like Fogg's Point, what we call over the Kizzies, down the Barn, Hog Neck, on down towards Tangier Island. They were all them little islands was inhabited, and I don't know how many people on each one, but they had that as a coming together for all of them. And you got to remember that back there then it was sailboats that weren't the transportation it is now. They all had little log sailing canoes, and they would sail from these various parts around the island and meet here in what they called at that time the Grove. And since it first started, that's the way it's always been. And even through the struggles of making it to it, people has always made their plans to have that week set aside for a spiritual revival within themselves, a week set aside to thank the Lord, to praise His name. This is what it's all about. Family, friends, getting together to worship our Savior. If I go back to when I was a child, camp meeting was this. The place out there never had any screen. It weren't screened in. And they had just as many bugs in as we have now. And under that tabernacle, sometimes at night, and they carried the services a lot longer then than they do now. Probably at least 30, 40 minutes longer. And these hot nights under there with not screened in, no fans. And they didn't even have electric lights. They had globes under there. And it would be awful hot. And I can remember as a small child playing in that sawdust, and my grandfather and some of the older men going around with these hand sprayers just spraying bugs in there while the service is going on. I can remember then progressing on up to a teenager, my early teens, where when I was growing up, if you were a girl or a boy and you weren't under that tabernacle that night, your parents would not let you date. You went home. So all of us teenagers made it a point that we were under the Tabernacle. And it was kind of funny. The girls would have their seats in front of the boys were sitting back, and I don't have to tell you, we were pulling the girls' hair and all that crazy stuff, trying to get their attention. But in the end, after it was over, we could ask a girl for a date, and a date at that time consisted of just holding hands, walk around the island, and talk, and sometimes it'd be for 3 or 4 couples of you together, and we'd always stop. They had places then, it was snowball places, had an ice cream parlor here then. Before that big fire, they had what they called a boarding tent out there. They even had a barber from Chrisfield that would come over and cut hair during that week. And he brought his son with him that shined shoes for people. And it all went on to what they called the boarding house. And the boarding house was just a big building. I don't remember it. It was just a little, that got burned up in the fire. And I remember hearing them talk about it. But it was one of them times that you had so much fun together that nobody didn't want to miss camp meeting. Even if you were away in service, that was your highlighted year to come home for camp meeting, because you know that everybody else was going to be there. And it weren't any air conditioning then. And they just sat under them trees out there and just enjoy each other's company. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, most of the men and boys, and that's where they met their wife. I didn't really meet them; they already knew them. But probably their first date with them was a camp meeting date, because that was a date week if you're a teenager around here. It was, and the first time I met her and asked her for a date, she let me know nothing done, and I said, well, you just as well, because you're going to be my wife. Little did we know a year later that we would finally have that first date the next year at camp meeting, and we dated for 3 years, and we've been married for 58 years since. So, wow. So it must work. People just doesn't, for whatever reason, doesn't go to church as much as they used to. That's old timers do, but the younger generation don't put the emphasis on the church like they should. I mean, you can have whatever belief you want, but I put my emphasis on an Almighty, that created all of this, created us. And I think I've been taught all my life, and I've always looked forward to it, to trying to serve that God the best way I know how. And the younger generation does not put that kind of emphasis on God. I was always taught to put God first. And I think somewhere down the line, it's going to be a lot of regret come along to this generation if they don't start doing more of that. It's been the focal point of our island all of my life, and back, I've been told way back. Any decisions that had to be made in the community, if it was any importance, most of the time was always made through the church. And it was more or less, I don't want to say a governing body, because it weren't, but people always respected, even the ones that didn't go to church, respected the decisions from the leadership within the church of how we govern our community. Didn't have any laws or anything like that we had to go by, but it was out of mutual respect for our elders. People in the community always respects the pastor. They have the same kind of respect in a different way for our school teachers, for our nurses. Now it's EMTs. We've always respected in this community people of authority, or that people that's within authority. And and we always try to put people in that position that we can respect with their decisions. And their decisions, for the most part, it's not 100% by no means, but for the most part, their decisions is respected. Are you headed in a direction you're satisfied with your life or not? If you're not, I would encourage you to look to a spiritual aspect of this. If you've not been brought up in a spiritual community or a spiritual home, look that way. My way of thinking, your life is going to be much fuller and much richer if you do it. You notice more things around you that the Creator has put here for our enjoyment. You will live a much fuller and richly rewarding life by being a part of something that's bigger than you are. For people that's visiting the island, I hope they can go back with just a little glimpse of what our country used to be like, of where we've come from, where we still are in some respects, at least in this community, with the respect to our Creator. For the people that's here on the island, that lives here all the time, I would hope that everybody will have a spiritual revival within their own lives, a renewing of the spirits within them, that they can grasp what this whole life is about, and we're traveling through it at a fast pace, and maybe we can slow down just a little bit to acknowledge what our Creator has done for us and see what we can do for Him.